So yeah, just go ahead, get into your week 1 directory. I just made another directory called data just to clean this up a little. And then I CD'd into that.
How did you say earlier that you end the Ruby server we were running?
Control C.
Is that from the terminal?
Yeah, make sure like if I have a, so if I CD back into that, yeah, that would be in the terminal. So like if this is running, if I have my Rails server running, yeah, I'm going to use Control C, and Control C is a pretty common hotkey to like quit stuff like this in your terminal. So it's a good one to kind of just have memorized. Like if I'm in IRB, Control C does not get me out. Does it get me out in Node? Like, see it, like it works, it gets me out of the Node terminal. It doesn't get me out of IRB, but it'd be nice if there's a little more consistency, but
I was able to get out of it.
Cool. So I'm going to go back into data. I'm going to open this up in code. And I'm just going to make a demo.rb in here. Now, the first thing, before we get started, I kind of just want to talk about, the data we're going to be working with. So this, we can kind of think of this as like just like a blueprint. So we're going to have a user class or a user hash. It's going to have these keys: an ID, a date joined, a name, friends, and posts. So the ID is going to be of the data type integer. The date joined is going to be, we're actually going to use a date type. So we haven't talked about that, but most programming languages are going to have a way to work with dates. So Ruby does, so we'll see that today. We're going to have a name key. That's going to be a string. We're going to have a friends key. This is actually going to be an array of these objects because it's going to be an array of users. Then we're going to have posts, which is going to be in an array of objects, and those objects are going to look like this, where we have a text, which is going to be the type string, likes, type integer, and comments, which is going to be in an array of strings. So with this is going to like stretch our minds a little because we're working with this really nested data. But this one, I'm just going to comment it out because this is not valid Ruby code. It's just there for me as a reference. But then in the next line in Slack, this is actually our data. And we can kind of look at this in a second, but go ahead and just copy this and paste that inside of here. And this just gives us some data to work with. So just a couple notes. So I am requiring date. So I want to use this date class, but to use that, I need to actually like require it in this Ruby file. So for some of these things, if we want to use them, we need to add them. So I'm going to require date, and now I can use this capital D date object, which is a Ruby. This is just a Ruby class, and we'll talk about classes later. But now I can make a class object, and this is going to have its own methods on it. So I'm going to use this, and we could actually, I could do this as well. Do like a date demo.rb. Just to kind of show this. So I require date, I create a new date, and I could run this. So Ruby date demo.rb. See how I'm like I create a date. This is 2001, 2, 3. Well, this is the year, this is the month, this is the date. So if I wanted to do today, what is today? The 11th, 11/11/2021. And then this str time, this is just string format time. It's a way I can just format this string, the date, to a nice looking string. If I don't require date, let's see what happens. Now I get this there, uninitialized constant date. So that's why I need to require this date up here. Cool. So that's just a little side note what I'm doing there, just so we can work with some dates. So yeah, here is our blueprint. So let's actually look at a user. So a user has an ID that is going to, the key ID, the value is going to be an integer. The date joined is going to be a date. The name is going to be a string. Friends is going to be an array of users. And our posts is going to be an array of objects that have text, which is, you know, string likes, which is an integer, and comments, which is an array of strings. And then we have multiple users, but I'm keeping this data uniform. So all users have an ID, date join, name, friends, posts. And their posts all have text, comments, and likes. So this is the data we're going to work with. And so we're going to do a little bit of brain teasers and challenges with this data. Any questions on like how this is formatted?
I have a question. So for friends, it's just an empty array, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that we're going to add to later, or should I know what that means?
Yeah. Well, because friends are eventually going to be users. So I just wanted to define all my users before I add friends. But yeah, that's something we're going to add. So, but before we add friends, let's do something. Let's just say like user 5, I want to get this this comment right here. Or let's do like the talk. I want to get tacos man from user 5. So how do I get that? Like I want to like puts that out to the console. So remember, with all of these, we can always start small. It's not like maybe we don't have to do this all at once, but we can go like piece by piece. Any ideas? Let me make this a little.
Well, you have to tell it which user you're going to pull from, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fine place to start. So let's just put the user 5. Ruby demo. Cool. So there's that user. Still trying to get this, just this tacos man. So what do I need to grab next?
You have to tell it which array it's going to pull from.
Yeah, but what is that? How do I get that array though? Or what is the name of the next thing I need to go into?
The array's identification.
Posts.
Yeah, it's posts, because that I'm going to go users,
Oh.
user 5 posts, and then we could do that one and then run that. Oh, I spelled that. So that's coming back as nil because I misspelled posts. It's with the S. There we go. Now see, this is our array of objects where we have text, likes, comments. So I have an array of these objects. Go back to user 5. Which index does this one live in of those objects? It's this one, right? That's the object I want to get in my post array. What index is that?
Really love, see,
What?
Was it number 1?
Yeah, it's 1. So posts 1. Boom. Now we have that. That's a hash, right? I could do dot class. That's our hash. Should I do keys? See the keys I have on there. Text, likes, comments. But that is the post/1 that grabs me that specific hash. So I'm getting closer to the tacos. But now I need to access the comments. There we go. Now I'm down to just one array. So how do I get the tacos from that one array? That's 0, 1, 2, 3. There we go.
let me go back for a second. I don't see where the arrays are. No, I got a 0, 1, and a 1.
A 0, 1, and a 1.
You know, where you tell user 5, you tell you want to look at the post sections, but then where's the identifier that's showing one group over the other?
So here's post. Post is in an array.
Yep, that part. And then you have
So
to tell
I
which,
want to grab this thing. That is index 1 because this would be 0,
oh, okay.
1, 2. So then I grab that one, and then on there I grab the comments.
And then the index of the spot you want.
Yeah, 0, 1, 2, 3.
I was looking for an actual number on it.
Yeah, this is where this gets a little confusing because user 5 post, that's in an array. So user 5 is a hash. So if I want to get something from a hash, I can access it by its symbol. Users post is in an array, so I want to index that by the index of the array. Well, users post at 1, that whole thing is a hash. So I want to grab the comments key. That whole thing is in an array, so then I can index that.
Yeah, I think it was just because it was going downwards instead of off to the left like it normally was. It threw me.
Cool. There's a good little brain teaser.
There's a question. What happens if you got, a million arrays going down the page? I mean, you're not going to sit there and just individually count them.
Oh no, we're not gonna. Yeah, you're never gonna count these. This is more just like a kind of testing to see. Like, yeah, you would never say like, here's tacos, man, and then have to count them. It's more just like, how would you get that? Just kind of seeing if you can read it. That
Okay. I was getting ahead of myself.
Yeah. Cool. So what if we want to add, because yeah, right now, none of our users, like if I do user 1, friends, like none of our users have any friends. They're all empty arrays. How would I add a friend to a user? And a friend is a user, right? Like, let's say I want user 1 to be friends with user 2. Any ideas how to do that?
You just do like user 1 and then index to friends and then dot push.
yeah, I could do that. I could do user one, grab that friends array, and then push user two. And maybe we want to make this like, we don't want to have people who are only like, the friendship should be mutual, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'll grab user one friends list and I'll push on user two. And then I'll grab user two. I'll grab that user's friends list and I'll push on user one. So now user one and two are friends. We could say puts user one friends. So who is user? How would I grab user one friends, their first friend, and grab their name? I mean, it's right.
Index 0
Yeah,
after
index-
friend.
Yep, that's going to grab me the first friend. And then how do I grab the name? Do you see how this
But dot name.
yeah, the colon name. That's Will's. So this is kind of like just the mental exercise of like looking through this saying like, oh, user one friends, and this is where naming variables is very useful because you can start to kind of just, if you name your variables right and your keys right, it will make a lot more sense because this right here is my user one's friends. So since I'm pluralizing that probably sounds like that should be in an array. So if I want to grab the first one, then I can grab the first friend, user one friends. That is the first friend. Well, that's just going back to like this user object, right? That has an ID, date, join, name, friends. So I could actually grab this user's friends, grab the first friend off of that list, dot name. And you see how this is going, like, these should be the same. I kind of went like in a circle. Let's comment this out. Oh, I'm doing JavaScript, sorry. I do that all the time. So the name is the same. Because my user one name, that is forged in fire. So I grab that, and then here I set user one friends to user two. I grabbed user two friends. I made user one and user two friends. Then here I grab user one's friends. I grab the first friend, and then I'm looking, which is user two. Then I grab user two friends. I look at that first friend, which is really just user one. So I've kind of gone back to that user one, grab their name.
Could you do something like add user six's date joined as a friend of user two? Like you could do something weird like that, right?
Yeah, so I could go to user two friends, push, whatever. Woo, who. Or let's just do like, let's say like Tony. And then I could go ahead and just puts out user one, or let's actually make this user one, add it to both user one and user two.
What if you wanted to push something that was like really deep into the array into a category of another person's
Well, let's
hash.
yeah. Let's look at this one though first, because this works, right? Like a lot of the times when you ask the question, can you do something in coding? It's hard to find maybe some instances, unless it's like syntactically incorrect, where the answer is going to be no. Like we can do this. We can do a lot of things. I think a better question to ask is, should we? Because I can definitely push Tony onto the string Tony onto users two's friends or onto the array of friends. Why would I not want to do that?
It doesn't have the same data structure as all the other users.
Yeah, I'm going to start messing up this little blueprint I have of what I'm expecting a user to look like. So when I have friends, I'm expecting this to be an array of users. So if someone comes on here and pushes a string on this array, that's going to probably break my code in other places. If I keep, what we really want to do is keep our data uniformed. So I'd say you can do these kind of things, but you'd want to definitely not change the original structure of your user.
But despite the fact that you shouldn't do certain things in certain scenarios, like I wanted to know, like, right, the first push thing that you did was just pushing an entire user profile into that friends list.
Yeah.
But what if you just wanted to push one element in one person's hash into one element into another person's hash? So like one really drilled down spot is where you want to put one piece of information that is really drilled down in the hash.
Yeah, so I mean, like, so adding something to a comment per se. Like, is that
Right.
Yeah, so we could do something like that where we could grab user one, that would be posts. Yeah, let's say we want to add a comment dot, like we grab their post, let's maybe grab the first one. And then, so we grab the first post and then in comments, then we grab maybe, or we just grab that array and then we can call push. And then like comment, new comment. Is that kind of what you're asking?
No, I'm asking, like, what if you wanted to push a comment from someone else's array of comments into user one's zero index comment spot? Like, so can you push something that is also a set of drilled down information? Yeah, like that.
Yeah, for sure. Because now I could grab user two posts, grab, I don't know, their first comments one. Because once again, what I think when you're looking at these, this is like, it's like doing a math problem. 1 + 1 + 2 + 3. You can kind of think of this as, you know, I could say that's 1 + 1 + 2 + 3, but really I could also say this is just 7, right? I might be able to do that in my head and be like, oh, that really is just 7. Same thing with this users 2 / post 1 comments 1. Well, that's user 2 post. I grab the first one, comments 1. Well, actually, I don't have that comments 1 in there because it's undefined. But if I switch that to 0, that is just this string. that's making sense. Like, those are the exact same thing. Those are going to do the exact same thing. But yeah, that's like that's a little like, that's a good way to like really stretch your mind to look at that line of code right there. I don't know, we should see if that actually worked. I mean, if you're doing stuff like this, can definitely get like prone to errors. So I might want to change that. So let's see, user one. Let's just see if that actually worked. Yeah, flat life forever. So that pushed that on that the user one's comments. But in my mind, I don't even need to look at my structure. I know user, well, if I need to, I know that this is a string. User two post, comments, that should be a string. So as long as my comments here, and this is my user's post comments, that is an array of strings. So I'm just pushing on a string. So yeah. So this, I think this just takes some time to, and practice to get used to kind of thinking of it this way. But does it kind of at least make sense as like I go through it bit by bit?
If it makes sense, just worry that if I'll remember or not later.
Like I said, with all of these problems, start small. Like, if I say get the comments from user 4, well, first just get user 4, then get their posts, then get the specific post that has the comment you're looking for. But we're going to go through some, we can do a lot with this data. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's keep working on this. I'm going to go ahead and add some friends to like user 1. Let's just do user 3, user 4. And then user 2, let's give them user 3. So what does that give us? For user 3, they're friends with user 1 and user 2. And then user 4 is friends with 1. Okay, that's just the way we can give our, like, manually push some friends into that. Push some users into their friends array. Cool. Yeah, let's kind of go through some little some brain teasers now. And I have some here. I'm just going to take these from Neo and just kind of Slack and put these in here, and we'll kind of look at these. Okay, let's just start with this one. Write a function that takes a user and returns the string with name has number of friends. So we don't want to say name, we want to say, actually say the user's name and then has however many friends they have. So let's write a function. Let's call this def, I don't know, friend count. Now this function takes a user. Do I need to call this parameter here user? Like syntactically, does that have to be called?
Couldn't you just leave it blank and then insert it when you do the put?
Okay, so I can't leave it blank because in this is saying it, this function takes a user. So I do need something here. Do I have to call that user though?
But you could just call it any variable name, I guess,
Yeah, I
right?
can call it like taco. But why would I call it anything other than user? So that's what I'm going to call it. So something I think that can really help as you're like writing these. Let's just start simple. Like let's just print out the user and then let's call this function just to make sure we have it set up and we kind of maybe understand what we're trying to do. Now I can run this actually, and then I'm going to get rid of all these. Where am I putting out all of this stuff? So I want to get rid of all these logs. No, wait, that is just my user. Okay.
Since this is coming up in this thing here, I was wondering about naming conventions for variables and using numbers. And I'm noticing that you're just putting user one or like no dashes or like, no underscores or anything in between that. Is there naming conventions that involve using numbers for Ruby or JavaScript?
Actually, maybe that. I'm trying to think if that should be snake case or not. But I think that's fine. I mean, you can use numbers are very like valid. Obviously, it's working. So you can use numbers in your variable names. I think it's generally, I don't know, like this is kind of a weird case where I'm like user file, like it's just like this demo, but yeah, I'd say to answer your question, I think this is fine. Is that your like what do you mean by convention?
Yeah, I was just wondering because last night when I was doing problems, I was like, oh, maybe I should use like snake case, but you didn't. So I just didn't know if that there was a norm for that.
Yeah, I would need to like Google that. Like, should in Ruby, should that be user underscore one or should it just be user one? So that could kind of be camel case, but I'm not 100% sure. So, but let's, yeah, so actually when I'm putting this out, this is actually, I'm putting out this user, which is, this is a huge user just because it has a lot of friends. That's why this is so big. So let's just print out the name and make that a little smaller. And I'm also going to get rid of this puts right here where we're putting out the date time. Cool. So for this, now I'm able to print out the name. I could try, test out a different one, user 2, Fortune Fire and Willis. Something else you can do, I mean, I might write this in one line. Has and then interpolate this. Let's see how it looks like. That is, oh, user friends. Well, that's not exactly what I want. What do I want to do on my friends? I want the number of friends.
You want to dot count it?
yeah, dot count or length. Now something you can maybe do, like, and it's just kind of a preference. I think maybe as you're starting, it might be easier if you maybe make some variables like username, and instead of trying to do this in one line, I could say, hey, my username equals user underscore name. I could do my num friends equals this. Maybe I could just say name. I don't need to say username. So name has num friends. This might make it easier for you as well, as to kind of like maybe you break this up into parts instead of trying to do this in one line. It's kind of up to you. Because then you can be like, oh, you can break this up into like, oh, how do I get the name? How do I get the num of friends? You can kind of break this up into smaller tasks. And you can worry about like, how do I join those together? So that's kind of working. There's one little, I would say, and this is kind of nitpicky, but there's one thing that's technically wrong with my function. It's really not quite following this exactly. Is this function returning the string, name has num friends? It is not returning that. If I say like, x equals that, and then I puts out x. Oh, now is it doing it? Oh my gosh. Ruby. Okay, I guess technically it is.
Can you Slack out that formula? I'm getting an error and I don't know what I typed wrong.
Yeah, I will. So Ruby is actually returning the string, but then it's actually printing it. So I would, and I'll Slack this out. Let me say this with the puts messages. So I know as we're starting to code, you're using a lot of these print messages, but as we get into like Rails, print messages are really only going to be used for debugging. So I think it's kind of good to maybe start getting into the habit where, this function returns the string, and then we can do whatever we want with that string. So we don't puts it inside of here. We have this function return the string. And then when we call that, we can store that to a variable, or we can just print that directly right here.
So I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I was doing this on the homework yesterday and I started putting return on there so I could see explicitly where it was returning. But I know Ruby has the implicit return, so is it bad practice to actually put in the return?
So with things like this isn't going to break anything. It will if you're like on your map functions. If you put return, there's stuff with like your map functions where you don't want to do it, but this is not going to break anything. There are times where you are going to want to, where you're going to have to say return, even in Ruby. But I think the convention in Ruby is, yeah, you want it, put it there. Let me just give you a demo of where you would have to have the return. Like, let's just do something like def is, let's just do like add. Let's do an add function. Okay, we get num1 plus num2. So here's our simple add function, 1 and 1. Let's puts that out. Okay, we might want to do a check like if, you know, num1 dot class, you know, does not equal integer. Or let's just say like, let's just check to see if like it's a string. Like if this is a string, we don't want to do the math. So I could say like return. Do math on strings. I don't know if I might have to change this check, but yeah. So if I now pass this function a1, if this match equals string, which it does, because one's a string, it's going to say, hey, we can't do math on strings. Do you see why I need the return there? Because if I don't have the return here, it's going to run this. It's going to hit this, but it's not done. And then it's going to go on to this next line. So sometimes I have to have the return, because if this is a string, I want to just return this string, and then I want the function to stop because I don't want to go any further. So here we could say like need the return here.
So basically, you're just using the return to break the function, so it doesn't go to the num1 plus num2 instead of putting the num1 plus num2 into an else statement.
Yeah. And you know, yeah, because maybe here if it's a string, you'd want to do like, yeah, handle the string case. Maybe you actually do want to do the math and then return it. You might have another like, you know, if num is, I don't know, binary or something, you know, handle that case and return it. So yeah, cool. But yeah, as we start getting into code, I mean, a lot of places, like if you have put like companies, like if you have puts messages, they'll probably like want you to remove them all, like in console.logs. For now, as we're learning, that's fine. We can have them, but starting next week, they really are just going to be kind of like tools for you as a developer to kind of help see where you're at in your code. And so our functions are going to, their main purpose is going to be like, they're going to usually take in some data, do some stuff, and return data. Generally what a function does. Doesn't always have to take in, you know, parameters. It doesn't always have to return something, but that's at a high level what functions do. Cool. So let's do a couple more of these and then take a break. So write a function that takes a user and returns a object, a object hash with name and number of posts. So this is very similar to this last method, but instead of returning a string, we want to return a object / hash with the name and number of posts. So let's call this one like, see, and this is where like naming this stuff, like what do we call this?
Post count.
What?
Post count.
Post count? Yeah, we could call this post count. So once again, this takes in a user. So I could do something like this, name equals kind of just user name. So let's just focus on like, getting the name first, returning a hash with the name, and then we can worry about doing the number of posts. So I want to have this function return a hash. So return, and I don't have to say return, but so let's grab our hash name. It's going to be equal to our variable name. And then we can put this out, post count. User 1, maybe do user 2. Cool. So there we're printing out our hashes with just the name key and the values, but I'm still testing like, are these correct? Something else you can do, like as you're going through these, well, maybe I want to go up and actually check. Like, is users 1, is their name Forged in Fire? Yes. Is user 2, is their name Willis? Yes. So I'm kind of checking. Cool. Now I can do the post count. So I'm going to look at this. I can go look at my data. So my user has a posts, which is in an array. So let's just go ahead and grab that post, users, user posts dot count. And then in my hash, go ahead with name. I should actually, since I should match the, like, if the task is asking me to return num of posts, then that's probably what I should call my key.
Yeah, is it bad form to name your variable inside your function with the same name as the function?
No, it's actually probably better. Because I'm not because this is just the key in my hash. So the name is going to be the name. The num of posts, well, that's going to be the num of posts. Does that, I mean, this is in particular with a hash, like those probably should have the same names. Like, why would I call this num of post, num posts here, but when my key is called num of posts?
I meant like the function is called post count, and originally you had put post count for the second variable. So would that be confusing?
Wait, this count right here?
The where you have num post at the beginning of that in red, the variable name,
Yeah.
you had put post count originally before you were like, oh, we should name it num of post. But post count is also the name of the function.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, I should not name it I should not name it my function name. Sorry, I didn't realize I did that. I thought I called it num post.
I could have been confused, but I thought you said post.
Yeah, I definitely would not want to call that the name of the function, because then I might be reassigning Not in root. Yeah, that's going to give you different behaviors in different languages. So yeah, that would be a bad name. Because we saw yesterday, or we saw this week, I can call a function in my, like, this post count is the function. Like that would actually call my function in here. And by assigning that to something, like, I don't know, is that going to like reassign my function, or is Ruby going to be smart enough and be like, well, this guy's being stupid, so I'll help them out a little. Like you might get unexpected. I can't say for certain what Ruby's going to do here. I think that probably cause issues in JavaScript. Or like if I had declared my JavaScript variable as a const, to be like, hey, you can't redefine it. But I'm trying to think. Yeah, just avoid that. Sorry, if I did that, yeah, that was bad practice. That would not be good. So I think what I should call it, just being really nitpicky, is just what it's called as the key. That's, if I'm going to call the key num of post, then I should just call that num of posts. And then that's what I'm going to return. And then I can run that. And there we go. Sweet. Let's do one more. And then
So in this formula, are we essentially adding the hash or the key num of post to the hash?
to our original user hash.
Yeah, or are we just creating that in what's returned and it's not actually going to be like tracked anywhere? Like, is this information being saved, or are we just creating this only in this function?
Yeah, and this is a important point to like think about as you're writing these, and this is going to get like important when we get to React. We can think, or like start asking yourself, does this function, like it's that mutate word again, mutate, or does it have a side effect? You'll also hear it called, does it have a side effect? Those are computer terms you'll hear. And that's meaning kind of what you were asking, Madeline. Does it change, the original data? Now, sometimes you want this, sometimes you don't. You don't. When we get to React, like with React, it's generally, we usually don't want that to ever happen, but sometimes you do want it to happen, but it is a good thing to think about. So I'll just kind of like turn the question back on you. Is this changing our data, the original data? Like, is it going to change user 1 or user 2?
I would think that it's just creating that data in the function because we're not pushing it to the hash.
Yeah, and I saw Fabio had a thumbs down. Yeah, this is not changing our original data. We're just pulling data from our object, and then we're creating a new hash. So it's not going to change anything. If I did something like user name, if I grab the key and then set that equal to something else, then that would, like, that's a line of code that would change the original object. So these ones do not. The ones we've written so far have not changed the original data. And in general, this is a general statement, not true all the time. generally mutating and side effects, I would say can be bad. You might not want your functions to do that. There's this programming paradigm called functional programming. We'll do a lot of it when we get with React, but where it's like you write pure functions, and pure functions are guaranteed to never change the original data. So it's like you never mutate anything. You always take the data and you return new data. But that's a little more advanced, but I think it is good to like whether or not to do that. But I do think it is good to keep in mind, hey, is this changing the data or is it not? For now, don't worry. Like sometimes you are going to want to maybe change your data. That's fine for now. Cool. I think for this homework that none of these should really change the original value unless there's like an update function. Cool. So let's write a function that takes actually, let's take a break. It is 11:40. We've been going for a little bit. Let's come back at 11:50. Are there any questions on any of this? Does anyone need any of this code?
Yeah, can you throw it out in Slack for me, please?
Yeah, I'll just throw this whole thing out in Slack. Cool. Anything else? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Just kind of keep going through these. So this is, and I'm just going to stick with Ruby today. I think tomorrow we're going to talk about GitHub, and then maybe we'll do a little of these examples in JavaScript. But I think for your homework today, and let's just stick with Ruby. Let's just keep going through some of these. So let's write a function that takes a user and returns the key names and values. So this is kind of like wanting us to go loop over an object. So let's do that. Let's just call this def, I don't know, user key value. And then this will once again take a user and end. So say we get to a spot like this, I don't think we've talked about looping over an object in Ruby. So let's say you're doing your homework and you get to a spot, or maybe there's something we haven't talked about. That is going to become more and more common as we get further in the class. So can't always assume that you might run into a problem where you could maybe go back to Neo, or you could go back to the lecture and find the solution. Sometimes we might ask you to do stuff that maybe we haven't talked about. So if we get into a situation like this, and we're like, okay, we need to loop over an object in Ruby. If you can get it to that point, well, then we can Google that. Loop over a object. I keep on calling it an object. I could say hash in Ruby. And I might come through and see some examples. Ruby hashes. I like this. Launch School's got some pretty good resources. But if I'm maybe trying to find something specific, I might look for, has anyone run into Stack Overflow already? Stack Overflow is a great resource. Stack Overflow is a place where people ask questions and then other people answer them. So this can be a way, maybe this is like really good, especially for like setup for very specific questions. You might find stuff on Stack Overflow. Likewise, you might have something more like Launch School or like Code Academy, where it gives you an article and it gives you like a good explanation about like what it's doing. So this can be a way to learn a lot about like a specific concept. But something like Stack Overflow just might give you the answer, and it might have some explanations. So it looks like we can do a each loop with a hash, where we kind of do it like in an array, except we're going to get two values. We're going to get the key and then probably they're calling this the array here, but that's probably just going to be the value. And you could probably have deciphered that if you like read over this, iterating over hashes in this Code Academy. We have a dot each where we can call the value and key and value. You can also probably do something like Ruby, just go to Ruby hat or like the Ruby docs, like hash, and go like read their documentation like on the each loop. looks like, yeah, each, and we can give it a key value. And they might have like an example. So let's try doing that. So let's take our user and do a dot each. So I think this one, I think what this is asking for, let's do this like we want to return. I'm going to change this up a little. So we're going to say that I'm going to say we want to return something like this, where it's going to be a hash, where we're going to have the keys, and that's going to be in an array, and then we're going to have the values, which is going to be in an array of all the values. It's kind of a weird way to return this, but this is more just trying to get us to do some challenging things. So let's go ahead and go through each of the this user object. Do our do. So it's going to be key, value, and end. Now, as you're like maybe going through this, once again, we can go through and maybe just print out some information to see maybe how we're going to solve this. So just doing this piece by piece. So maybe I'm just going to print out some messages because I've never used this each loop on a hash. So maybe I kind of want to get some to like see if I know how it's working. So let's see here. I'm also going to comment out all of these puts to clean up this console. So value. Where is it saying? So I'm seeing this is kind of a little hard to read. Actually, let's do user one has so many friends. I think that is making this, that's what's going on because it has so many friends. Let's just do user 5 because I think they have no friends for user 6. So it might be a little easier to read. There we go. So here's the key. There's the key is ID, the value, that's 7. So ID 7, date joined, etc. So I want to return an object that looks like this, that has all my keys in an array and all the values in an array. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an empty array. And as I go through each of these, I'm going to push. So through each of the key value pair, I'm going to push the key into my keys array. And then I'm going to go and push the values into my value array. And then here at the end, I can just return keys. Values. I'll do math on a string and also get rid of this one. And then I'm going to put this out because now that's returning that hash. So I'll put it out to the console so I can see it. That just looks like it's grabbing me the date. Okay, so now I'm running into a little bit of an issue. Why is it just printing out the date? Something I could do here is, so when you run into these kind of issues, let's just use some puts messages just to see what's going on. Oh, who knows what I'm doing? I just see it. I'm like, what?
Running the wrong code.
Yeah, I'm running the wrong file. Cool. That was awesome. It's like, that should not be working. I mean, that should be working, but cool. Yeah, it's running the wrong file. That's always fun. But now when I look at this, now I'm returning the hash that has my keys. There's all the keys, ID, date, join, name, friends, post, and then the values, 7, a date. This is going to be, that's probably that array. And actually, oh no, sorry, that's part of my date. That's my date. And then there's the name, and then there's the friends and posts. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to probably do this. There's a way just to grab all the keys and all the values. I didn't actually have to loop over my user hashes, but I thought that'd just kind of be fun to show you. So, and yeah, with a lot of these, we probably might expect, you know, that you don't all have the same solution. That, you know, the way you write your function, there's usually going to be multiple ways you can write these. All right, let's just keep going. Let's write a function that takes an ID, you know, an integer, and returns that user. Okay, so let's call this one maybe find user. So this takes an ID, which, you know, I'm kind of expecting to be an integer. And we need to go through our user, like our users, and find that user. So I think for this, let's also go ahead and, so we have a whole bunch of users. Let's go ahead and create an array of users. User 1, and just throw all of these users on in an array. Let's go ahead and make this a instance variable, or we could just, let's actually just pass it to this function. We could, so remember with Ruby, we're either going to want to pass it to the function or make this an instance variable to use it within our function.
You have an extra S in your last user in that array.
Oh, thank you. That would break stuff. So I'm just going to leave this as, I'm just going to pass this function or this users array to my function just to get some practice with that. So write a function that takes, let's also add this a list of users and an ID and returns that user. Now, just because I'm calling this users and this users, those are not the same thing. Right? This users right here on 163 is a parameter that's only scoped to this function. I'm going to use my actual users array when I call this function. So in Ruby, I'll just tell you this one. There's a, because what we want to do is we want to, well, let's do this without the find method. Let's see. how we could do this with the each method. So I want to go through all of my users and I want to see if the ID equals that user, and if it does, I want to return it. So let's do this with an each loop. So I'm going to go through each of my users. And what I can say is if my user ID, does that equal the ID that was passed? And what I really want to do is like return that user. But something to kind of note with this each loop. So this find user is a function, and then I'm doing an each loop, and this do end, this is kind of like its own inner function. So it's really not, it's going to go through each of my things. So something I could do, and I'd actually have to Google this, is like stop in each loop in Ruby. I wonder if we can use like the break keyword. Looks like we can maybe use. Let's see if we can do a break keyword. So break, let's try this, because another thing you want to do that I think is very useful when you're learning something new, or like you come to a Stack Overflow, or you're trying to figure out how to do something, and then maybe you try to throw it in your example. Maybe our example is kind of a little complicated. And what we could do is maybe copy and paste one of these examples and throw this into just like a, I don't know, have like a sandbox or like a playground, whatever you want to call it. .rb. Because this has like a lot of code, it has all our user information. Maybe I want a simple Ruby file where I can kind of experiment with some stuff. So this is not quite what I want. What I'm trying to do is, let's say I have an array of numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe I want to like count up to 4 and then stop within each loop. Let's say puts num. But now that I have this code in like this separate file, it's just 5 lines of code. It's very easy to reason about. Just gives me this place where I can kind of experiment. So let's come run this Ruby playground. Cool. So I'm counting up to 7. Perfect. There's my each loop. What I want to try to do is see if I can like break out of this each loop. So let's try, and I saw that break keyword. I was like, oh, is that going to break me out of this each loop? So let's say if my number equals 4, let's see if I can break out of this. Cool. So what I've done is I've kind of simplified, because my problem was I wanted to see, can I break out of an each loop? So instead of trying to do that inside of here with all of my real data, where it's kind of a little more messy, I just created another file, and I did a really as simple as an example as I could think of. Just iterating over an array of numbers, checking if 1 equals 4, and then using that break and then seeing if that actually worked. Cool. And that stops iterating over each thing. Because what I want to try to do here is, you know, when I find that user, I want to stop and I want to return that user. And so now I could say, oh yeah, this break keyword's going to use, or this break keyword's going to work. Cool. So let's just keep on moving on from here to get to like the next issue. This one's a little more challenging. So now that I kind of tested that break keywords work, that break keyword works, now I can go back, run my code, ruby demo.rb. Okay, so I'm getting this error. Given 1 argument's expected 2, because now I'm expecting the users array, which I passed, but I also need to pass it an ID. Like I want to find the user with the ID 2. And I am going to make sure that I do have a user with ID 2. Cool. I'm not trying to like trick myself here. So I go ahead and I can run that. Cool, and that looks like that's pulling me that user. I could try it 5. It's ID 5. 6 is a little smaller, I think. Let's try 6. Cool. So that is working. Now this is I'm going to comment this out because this is a little, in my mind, this is a little messy. Like we got it to work with an each loop. Like this works, but there is a better way. Better way. Because finding something in an array is a very common thing we want to do. So Ruby has a built-in method on arrays where we can look for stuff. So let's try that, and it's called the find. And it works very similar to the each method, where we can give it a block. And for this, I can just pass in my case that I want to match. So user ID equals ID. So I give it a function or a block that if this returns true, it's going to go through each thing in my array. And if the do end block returns true, it's going to return that user and it's going to stop. So let's try running that. Boom. So that is working the same as this that we did with the each. But Ruby's nice. They built a method for us. It's called find that makes this cleaner to write. And let's just do this another way. So this is with a block. You know, if we can do, if our code is like in 1 line, like this is, we can use what's called a proc. So I'm going to comment this one out just to show you another way to do this. I'm still going to do it with my find method. But this time, and maybe some of you have seen this syntax, I do curly brackets. And then here I can do my, like, so this is still the same thing. It's like go through each thing and then run this function with this user parameter. And then I can throw in the match or the code I want. Let's just test that. undefined method user. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, users. Cool. So if I can write something in one line, like this one line of code, I don't have to use a block. I can. There's just another syntax available, which is called a proc. So what this is saying, it's going through each user. So it's taking my users array and it's saying find. So on each user, it's going to call this method where it takes that user and it says, hey, does that ID of the user, does it equal the ID that was passed to it? If it does, we're going to stop looping over the users and we're just going to return that object. And once again, this might be something, you know, it might be like as you're learning, maybe you want to take this into a separate file and like maybe simplify things a little. Just, you know, maybe this might be a little easier way to try things out. So I could do like an array dot find. Go through each thing. Let's call this X. X is just representing one of, you know, the items in my array, which happens to be a hash. So I could say something like X dot name equal test. Whatever, let's just say foo equals that, just kind of using some random variable names and puts foo. Let's run this one. Oh, sorry, I'm doing name. I need to access that like a normal hash. And yeah, because if you're confused about these methods and the homework, I think sometimes just breaking these up into simpler problems and just kind of messing around with it, this might help you understand some of these concepts. And it's a little easier to do. I can almost do like foo1 equals array 2 dot find. I'll call that string. Go through each string, and this is the string equal X. And that's a very basic example, but oh, that's why is this returning hello? Remember the find, this needs to return true or false. If it returns true, it's going to return that thing.
So you're actually redefining str there as whatever X is.
Yeah. And then that returns as like a truthy value. Because that's going to like, yeah, that's going to be a truthy value. So I forgot to do like the triple equals there. And there we go. Now it's getting X. So I would recommend having a like a separate file where it's easy for you just to kind of run some smaller examples. There's also IRB. You know, this can be a good, you know, a good little playground just to quickly write some Ruby code. You know, like how do I access an element in an array? You can kind of like quiz yourself that way. Does everyone know how to get, you just type IRB in your console, and then this is the interactive Ruby shell. So you can start typing in Ruby here. You can make yourself a hash. Like call methods on that, you know, xtop methods, stuff like that. Cool. And like I said, here's 3 different ways that all work. That's the most important part, that it's working. But this one right here with a proc, I would say this one's probably like, you see how this is kind of the cleanest? It's done in one line. We're using a specific function find that is built for this case. Like we could use the each one, but there's actually a method that's going to make this easier for us. Cool. Let's look at some more of these. Write a function that takes a user and returns the total likes of all users' posts. So if we look at a user is going to have posts, and each individual post is going to have a like. So what we need to do is we need to go through all the users' posts and start to sum up those posts. So once again, you might have a problem like this, and maybe it seems a little like daunting. I think what we could do is maybe come to our playground, maybe take our array of numbers, and then maybe we could simplify this problem. Like, okay, let's not really worry about that nested data structure. How if I just had an array of numbers, how would I sum up those numbers? And that's going to be a simpler problem maybe to solve. So let's do that. Array dot each do num end. Maybe I could like throw this in a function called like sum. And call this function sum. And just to get this started, I could put out my number just to see that I'm, you know, going through this. See, I already have an error. Undefined local variable method array. Okay, let's just make that an instance variable. Cool. So I'm looping through my numbers. How could, any ideas on how I could sum up these numbers?
Like define a variable that puts the total for the sum, and then when you're going through each, change the value of the sum to be like sum plus num.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the tricky, like the tricky part of this one is like the start. Like I need to, before I start looping through these, I should define a variable that's going to store the total or the sum. Maybe I call this method find sum. And then here I call this variable sum. So yeah, before I loop, I just set this equal to 0. But now I have this variable where I can say sum plus equals number. So I started at 0, and then I can slowly start to accumulate. So let's run this. Okay, now this is returning the array. So remember, this kind of goes back to Ruby implicitly returning the last thing. the last thing of this is the array.each. So it's going to do the array.each, and it just so happens that Ruby returns the array that was called the each on the each function. So the last thing we need to remember to do for this function is after we find out the sum, we need to return it. And that's how we do that, or one of the ways. There's another method. There's a reduce method. I don't know if I want to go into this. I'm not going to talk about the reduce right now. We'll do that when we get into JavaScript, but there is actually a built-in method called reduce. You can look at that if you want, which is a good way to sum up stuff, but let's keep it with this way for now. So now
There's also a dot sum method in Ruby, isn't there?
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
Is it just, does it, let's see that. IRB 23.sum. Yep, okay, that's easy enough. What does that do with strings? Okay, so I guess that has to be an array of integers for that to work. So let's now take this, and I'm going to say this because reduce, I mean, sum, that's kind of a silly method, like to sum an array of numbers. The reduce method is really, really powerful. You can do a lot with it. The reduce method, you can like loop over an array of anything and return anything. It's really the each and the reduce method are by far like the most versatile of the array loops methods. So reduce is a little hard to understand. So that's kind of why I'm skipping over it. I don't want to go over that right now. But going back to where we were, we found a solution how to find the sum. Or an idea. So now let's try to apply that to maybe like our data, which might be a little more difficult. But since we kind of have an idea of how to solve it, this is going to become easier. So maybe I call this like total likes. This once again takes in a user, and so I want to go through, remember my users have posts, and post is an array of objects that has this likes key. So I want to do my dot each on the posts. So let's do user dot each, because I think this one we probably couldn't even use the sum method, right? Because we have an array of hashes. Seems like the sum would need to be an array of integers. So let's go through, actually, not user.each. I want to go through each user post.each do. And we're going to go through each post. So we kind of have that same, but now we have our strategy where we grab the sum, set that equal to 0. And then we just have our sum plus equal, grab the post and grab the likes. Because our post object, here's our post object. It has a likes key on it, which has the count. So once again, it's this, having solved this in a simpler way, where we just figure out how to find the sum, makes it a lot easier to do a little more challenging iteration of that. And then we need to remember to return sum. go ahead and print total likes, user 2. I mean, as we're running these tests, it's probably going to be a good idea to go check your data. Like user 2, 3112, so they have, 43 likes. So that way I can like test to make sure it was right. Run the right file. And there we go, 43. Questions on that? I think this one's a duplicate. Do you want to try this one on your own for like 10 minutes and then we'll solve it together? So let's look at this one. Write a function that takes a user and returns an array of strings of just the user's post. So what that's saying is like we would go through user 1 and just return an array of strings that would be like it will kill and it will cut. So here I'll kind of stub that out for you so you know what to expect. So it's I don't know, like get posts. So taking a user, like if this function took in user 1, we'll call this get posts text. If this took in user 1, I would expect the array of strings, like it will kill. Who watched Forge and Fire here? Any? Yeah.
Yes.
Nice. And it will cut. In Forge and Fire, they like make knives and swords and then they go test them against like pig carcasses or like gelatin dummies. And the guy will always say it would kill. So anyway, so this function that you're writing, that's what it should return. Just the array of strings. Does that make sense? So I'm going to give you till 12:45. So try this on your own, and then we'll go over it. If you get done with that, you can try this second one as well.
James, can you put the question back up?
Yeah, that should also be in Slack, but where is it?
Right there.
There you go, cool.
Is there another question that we could do after the number of friends and number of likes?
I did throw a couple articles. Maybe look at this one again. And so in Slack, there's a couple articles. Maybe you can start looking how to do this with the map function. Instead of did you use the each? You try doing that with the map function.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right. Let's get back to it. Yeah, for the homework, like I said, I think with all of these, especially when you're iterating over an array, you can do all of these with an each loop. There's probably a way to figure out how to make them all work. But there's a lot of other methods out there on arrays that help us do specific things. I'm gonna just slack this one out too. So I threw a couple articles, but let's kind of like look at some of these different methods before maybe we go look at this. Just with some basic examples. So let's say we have our array of numbers. Let's look at the map function first. So map, this goes through each item, kind of like the each loop. And we can give it a block. A block or proc to run. I'm also going to say function, like that's when we get to JavaScript. There's a map function in JavaScript that we can give a function. And whatever that I'll just say block for now, that block. Proc function returns is thrown, let's use push, this pushed into a new array. And that new array is returned at the end. Okay, so that's a mouthful. So let's see what that actually means. And we've looked at the map, I believe, a little bit. Let's say we have a nums array. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say I want to double this. So I'm going to call the map function. I'm just going to do my same do, go through each number end. And I'm going to do num times 2. So I'm going to go through my nums. I'm going to go through each number and I'm going to times it by 2. That's going to get pushed into this new array that's being created. And then when the map function's done, it's going to return that new array with all of these new return values. And then I'm going to store that to double. I could call this doubled. I can puts and doubled. Oh, I think I ran the wrong file. And there we go. 2468. So that's the map. There is a select. So select, there's kind of two. There's like a select and there's a filter. There's a select. Let me just say these select / filter. I wonder if Ruby does have a actual filter method. Yeah, let's just do the reject. Actually, I'll just do the select and then we'll talk about the filter because filter is JavaScript. So let's say we want to go through our nums array and call this select. Do num end. So this one, we're going to give it a Boolean. The proc, we give the block or the block or the proc a Boolean. If it's kind of like the find method. If this function returns true, it's going to keep the item into that new array. If it returns false, it's not going to keep it. So this is a way we can filter and select certain things. Like say I want to grab all the even numbers from my number array. 5, let's just add some more, 5, 6. That's evens. So now I can go through my array and I'm grabbing all of the even numbers out of that. So that's 2, 4, and 6. And notice, at the end of all of these, my nums array is left unchanged. And let's just review the find. The difference between find and select is the find is going to return the first even. So find just returns one thing. The select method is going to return in an array of all those conditions that were met. I need to actually call the find method on that. Returns first match, select, returns array of all matches that return true. So map is going to be a good one if you want to like update in an array. Select's going to be good if you want to filter out or remove some of your items from an array. Find's going to be good if you want to find one thing in your array. I guess let's just do reduce really quick. Reduce is good if you want to, I mean, reduce works for anything. I mean, you can do all these functions with reduce, but let's look at like a sum with reduce. We could find the sum of the numbers with our reduce function. So I could do nums dot reduce. So what the reduce function allows you to do is it allows you to keep track of an accumulator. And then also you can go through like the number. And this one's really, it's kind of, I think, hard to grasp, but what this function returns. So this inner block, the return value of this is going to be the accumulator for the next function call. And it keeps on going like that. And then when the reduce function's finally done, it returns the final accumulator. This puts out the sum and then this. So this is how we could find the sum of an array of numbers. See, and let's just put out the accumulator so we can kind of see this happening as we go through it each time. So our array is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See, as we go through each iteration in this reduce, we start with 1 because that's our first item. Then the next time we add 1 and 2, that's 3. Then the next time we add 3 and 3, which is 6. Then we add 6 and 4, which is 10. 10 and 5 is 15. 15 and 6 is 21. That's the final accumulator. That's what we return. So I think this one can take maybe a second to get your head around the reduce, but it is, it's really powerful because you can return any data type with this one. Like find's always going to return, you know, the data type of whatever the thing it found was. Select, map, those are always going to return arrays. But reduce can return anything.
How did you make in the first one that you did with map? How did you make the answer come out as in brackets instead of in like separate lines? Because at first you had it in separate lines. I don't know what you changed.
Oh yeah, that's the difference between puts and p.
Oh, okay.
So the P's, they just print out stuff differently. P gives you a little more information about like the data type and stuff like that. So I think that can almost, like P's generally for coding purposes, it's a better message. Or it gives you a little more information, I think, which is better. Cool. So I don't know. Let's look at this one really quick, but you might have done this with the each loop. Let's do this with the map function. Probably get that to work with the map function. So posts, I'm just going to call this posts. Sticks in a user and So we're going to do user, we're going to go through the posts. And I'm going to call the map function. Go through each post and end. So whatever this function returns is going to get pushed into that new array that we're creating. So what I want to return is the posts. I forgot what it's called. Post text. That's really all I want. And then that's all I need to do there. So I can go ahead and print that out. Let's try running that. Ruby demo.rb. Oh, let's call this function. All right, I guess I'll call this get post text. And there we go. So I'm using the map function, going through each of the posts and just returning the text. That's going to get pushed into that new array. And then once the map is finally done, you can think of there actually being like a return right here. That's what's going to eventually get returned. You know, this is just, and then like this one, you know, I could also probably, since this is, I could write this in one line. You know, just I could do a map. I could write this with a proc. So that might be, you know, a little cleaner way to write that. So we'll throw that up at the top. I can just comment this out. Undefined method map posts. What am I doing wrong? Oh, it's text. I'm getting nil because I had name. I don't have a name in my post. It was text. So there we go. There's with the map function. It's going to make it nice and clean. If I did this with the each, that's fine. Like I said, getting this to work is the most important. What I'd have to do is I'd have to come in here, create a post array, just kind of like we did with the sum. I kind of need this variable to store these values. Then I could go through my users or user posts dot each do post, go through each post and pass and push this onto the array, the text. And then at the end, return posts. We don't need that return there because it's Ruby. With each loop. So this works, but I would say, you know, the map function is going to be a little cleaner. Because then with the map function, I don't have to like set up this variable and push it onto that. I just map over it, just say, hey, put the text on that array we're creating and then return that. So good old coding, there's going to be like 20 ways to do the same thing. So I'm going to, let me Slack out these examples. I think this is a good time for lunch. These articles have good overviews on these methods. This one even right here kind of shows the difference of these methods in JavaScript and Ruby, because we'll talk about the JavaScript, these in JavaScript tomorrow. But the nice thing is, once again, with these methods, they're so common that Ruby and JavaScript's going to have the same functions. JavaScript has a map function that works the same way or a similar way. It does a similar thing. Syntax is just different. They both have a reduce function that behaves the same way. We have filter and select. In Ruby, it's called select. JavaScript, it's called filter, but they do the same thing. And we're going to use these a lot with React. Cool. I think that's a good stopping point. Does anyone have any questions? Cool. Let's meet back at
But
2.
I have a question. If you're, and everyone doesn't have to stay by if they don't want this answer, but when I was doing the get post text with an each loop, I didn't think about putting push. I was just putting, I was just changing the variable, and I guess it was changing the variable each time instead of adding each string to an array. So if I'm wanting to print an array of information, is the main way to do that just to push that onto an array? Or would there be another way to do that?
If you want to print in an array,
Like, if you go to line 205,
okay.
you pushed each text onto the variable post text, or the variable post that you created, which was an empty array. So if I want, is there another way that I could have added each post text into that array, or do you have to use push?
I mean, there's other methods, like I could do like that. I mean, that does the exact same thing as push. There's unshift. That would add it at the start. But
Right, but you just kind of have to, okay.
yeah, but
There's no like value, there's no numerical value, so you have to just like, yeah, add it like text. Gotcha.
yeah. You could, yeah, I wonder if you, yeah, I would say that's the way you want to do that. Or if you wanted like to add it at the start, then you'd use unshift to add it to the start of the array. So you could, I don't know, let's see, X. I mean, I think you could do it with a each with, I mean, this would be, I would not, this each with index, post index, and then do, you know, post at index equals post text. That, I think that would maybe work, but that would be a bad, that'd just not be the right way to do that.
Gotcha.
Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say this would probably work, but yeah, this would be the better way to do that. Sweet. Any other questions? Cool. Let's just call it I guess since we went a little longer, 2:05 will come back project time. Sweet. All right, have a good lunch, everyone. Go outside, go on a hike, get away from your computers. Talk to you later.